Hello and welcome to our very special episode of the Go Equal podcast. I am Dr. Joyce and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today. Go Equal is about reimagining gender equality. And this time we are taking a path that is creative and participatory. And this podcast is where we pull back the curtain on how that actually happens. So today I'm joined by someone whose creative vision has been absolutely central to bringing our methodology to life, Aman Dhindsa, who is not just a facilitator but a creative expert who helps people express what words sometimes can't capture. Aman, welcome. Tell me about your work, your passion, and your inspiration.
First of all, hello everybody, and thank you so much, ma'am, for having me here. I'm the author of Name Lost Through Borders, a work born from memory, identity, displacement, and the quiet ache of belonging. Alongside it, I created Footnotes of the Heart, a human library initiative dedicated to preserving emotions, lived experiences, untold stories, and the humanity we often overlook in one another. To me, writing has never just been about words on the page. It is about remembering people the world taught us to forget. It is about creating spaces where vulnerability becomes archive, where grief becomes testimony, and where every person is allowed to exist beyond labels, borders, and expectations. Through my work, I hope to remind people that every human being carries a library within them filled with stories that deserve to be heard, held, and remembered.
Wow, that's fascinating, Aman.
Thank
really,
you.
really exciting. And I promise that I'm going to read your book very, very soon. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
So Aman and I are going to take you, the listeners, on a journey today. And we'll talk about why we believe creativity and participation are powerful tools for exploring gender inequality. And we'll share some behind the scenes insights from our recent workshop in April. But before we dive in, let me set the stage with a question I often get. So, Aman, why use art and creativity to talk about something as serious as gender inequality? What would you say to that?
I feel like art as a self of identity is something where you can represent yourself without words, and sometimes people don't have words to articulate their emotions in a better way. Art can be felt, heard, seen without speaking, and all the emotions are going to be projected in the room, and people would feel more comfortable, validated, and find themselves looking in the stories of other people. So I feel art is something that connects everybody without even having to say that I need you. And they'll find somebody there in the room with them, just being connected to them in the form of art. So yeah, art and creativity goes hand in hand while dealing with different difficult topics and just being true to yourself and showing the world, okay, this is what I am. I can be different. I don't have to explain myself, and I can just showcase my talent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it basically connects people
Yeah.
beyond their language or culture or religion or whatever background you're coming from, and it connects people at a different level, isn't it? That's such an important point, Aman. You know, what we have developed at Go Equal is grounded something called participatory action research. This is a very academic word, I agree, but please stay with me because the core idea is actually quite simple and quite radical. The people who experience inequality aren't just subjects we study, right? They are the co-creators of knowledge. Yeah. So traditional methods, for example, doing a traditional workshop, right, often position people as passive participants, isn't it? Sometimes someone, a trainer or a workshop facilitator will come with a lecture and a PowerPoint presentation, for example, or a survey, or ask questions and leaves with data, basically. Yeah. So that is a very top-down approach. But this participatory method that we have been exploring and talking about flips that entirely, isn't it? It recognizes that a lived experience provides critical insight into structures shaping our lives. And when we combine that with art-based methods, as you do through your work, say through visual mapping, storytelling, symbolic design, we create spaces where people can communicate experience that might be difficult to articulate through conversational discussion alone, as you rightly pointed out. It's art goes beyond boundaries and beyond cultures. So, Aman, you have facilitated so many creative sessions like these in your work, through your work. So what do you see happening in the room when people start creating rather than just talking?
To start with, I want to start with something most of the listeners have probably felt in their bones. That moment when you walk into a gender equality workshop and instantly know what's coming. The slide deck, the statistics, as you mentioned, the raise your hand if questions, and you sit there thinking, I know this is important. So why does it feel like I'm just ticking a box? And the pattern is predictable. Information flows in one direction, as you mentioned, facilitated to audience, and the audience becomes a row of polite nodding their heads and just agreeing with what they're saying, and people leave with facts, but not with a shift, not with a sense of ownership. And sometimes the language itself becomes a barrier. The concepts don't land because they are abstract, academic, and or simply not connected to people's lived realities. And art connects those lived realities and experience in a way that they can just express themselves in a very amazing way. They can express those insecurities in a way that they don't feel ashamed of it. They don't have to feel like, oh, what the other person would think if I say that? And what's missing in those other workshops, that when I was talking to all the participants, was it was missing a human texture. And creativity brings that human texture in it. The people who don't speak because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing per se, the cultural nuances that never makes into that PowerPoint slide, but it makes the way in the art. If we keep going like this, like those presentations, those facilitating where it's just slides in, we'll be waiting generations for gender equality, not because people don't care, people do care, but because the way we are teaching doesn't touch the parts of us that actually change the behavior. And we are here to change the behavior. So the shift I see in those workshops is the change in the behavior of the way they are perceiving things, the way they articulate things, the way they talk about it, and the way they feel like this is where I belong. So that is the shift that we have to create, the shift I want to create, and everybody can feel it inside them that I'm taking that step.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That's exactly not only just dumping with information, rather creating that shift and helping people to take that shift in their behaviors, in their thinking and whatnot. I mean, that's very powerful.
Yeah.
And this is backed by research too, right? So gender inequality doesn't just show up, as you said, in employment statistics or policy documents. It's embedded in everyday experiences. And a PowerPoint slide is not incapable to capture that in everyday experiences, isn't it? Social expectations or cultural narratives, for instance. Many aspects of gender inequality remain invisible in traditional data collection methods, and because they're relational, emotional, and symbolic, isn't it? And arts, kind of methods of arts or creativity, brings out that so vividly. It's so powerfully. So we were just having a chat about methods like photo voice, for instance. Photo voice is a participatory visual method where people actually use photography to document critically reflect on what's happening around them. It's in their surroundings and things like that. And that has been very successfully implemented globally. Yeah. And we have actually taken a lot of inspirations, methods like those, right? And these approaches, but also expanded beyond photography or any specific methods, and rather make it more open-ended and more kind of broadened the scope of the methods. So we have used visual mapping, symbolic design, storytelling, imaginative world building. So basically multiple creative pathways for people to explore fairness, power, safety, and care. So Aman, I'm interested to know, can you break down what we actually do in these workshops? What does a participant experience?
Sure. I'm just going to continue what you said earlier, that it is grounded in decades of research. The methods that are based on arts activate part of brain that a traditional learning would not. When people create, they're not just processing information, they're integrating it emotionally, cognitively, and somatically. So that just creates a sense that they are present in that moment, and they're actually working with their hands. It's not their brain just receiving information, they're projecting it. And participatory action research tells us that when people are positioned as co-creators, not as passive recipients, the learning becomes transformative. They're not being told what gender equality should mean. They're discovering what it means for them, for their own lived realities. There's always a moment in the workshop you can see when someone's expression just softens, or they pause mid-drawing, or they look in their map and whisper, "I've never thought about it like this." That's the moment the information becomes insight.
That's kind of like the pin drop moment.
Oh my God. This is
God. I never thought
that's
in this
a
way.
revelation. Yeah.
And it's not like you're pouring knowledge on someone. It's almost like a self-discovery journey. These creative outputs aren't just artistic artifacts, right? They're recognized as qualitative knowledge that reveals patterns of experience. That is very important to understand what's happening around you. What patterns are your experience taking? When we facilitate reflection and collective dialogue around what people create, participants analyze their creations together, right? Identifying recurring themes, shared challenges, and possibilities for change. So let's talk a context. Why Canberra? Why Australia? And why now? So we know Australia ranks highly in many global development indicators, but gender inequality remains a big challenge, a big issue in the country, right? Issues like gender-based violence or unequal distribution of care work, gender pay gap, for instance, workplace inequality, barriers to leadership remain persistent challenges in Australia. So despite these challenges, for example, in Canberra itself, a vibrant ecosystem of organizations working on gender equality, which is very promising, and community engagement are getting very higher and higher in this area. So there are some fantastic initiatives, as we all know. Lauren Cannell's work with Artfulness, for example, also use arts and creative methods, right? Creative workshops to help young people explore human rights and personal safety through art. She was named ACT Women of the Year to 2025, and her Drawing for Your Rights program has shown how powerful creative practices can be for education and well-being. But there's a gap we also identified, isn't it, Aman? While many programs focus on personal healing, mental health, or youth education, relatively few initiatives are designed specifically to explore topics like gender inequality through participatory creative inquiry among adults and community groups. And that's the opportunity for innovation, right? So, Aman, when we first started discussing this project, what excited you about filling these particular gaps?
When we first started discussing it, we started discussing Lauren's workshop. And personally, as I have never attended it, but when I was reading about it, I was fascinated by it. She's an amazing lady and she's making a huge difference. But so there were a lot of gaps, as you mentioned. And the gaps when we were discussing, we were trying to address were simple but profound. People don't change because they are told to. They change because something inside them shifts. And that shift rarely comes from information alone. So our approach when we were discussing it, the thing that excited me the most was it's about making that expression accessible. Not everyone has language to talk about gender, power, identity. In some cultures, words don't even exist. But everyone can create. Everyone can make meaning through colors, shapes, metaphors, and movement. Creativity bypasses linguistic, religious, and social filters that often shut people down. And it removes the pressure of being right. When you're drawing, mapping, building, you're not performing, you're exploring. You're exploring your world, you're exploring yourself, you're exploring the thoughts of people around you. That's when people start revealing what they actually think, not what they think they're supposed to say. Yeah. And I think we had a conversation that we are not just going to give the information, we're going to receive it as well. So I think the excitement came from participants becoming the co-creators, and not just us facilitating it, not just us talking about gender equality, because everybody's doing that. And we wanted to make sure that participants can also share their knowledge in the room and not just receive it. And that's where the complex topics like gender, identity, equality suddenly became personal, embodied, and real. So that was the excitement, and it's an ongoing excitement, and I don't think it's never going to subdue.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree. That's beautifully put, Aman. And as you rightly mentioned, participants become co-creators of knowledge. And what we are creating isn't just about the workshops themselves, right? We are building the Equality Archive. Do you want to unpack Equality Archive for us?
Yeah, for sure. I'm just going to ask you to imagine something. Let me take you into the room where participants walk in. They don't see a projector or rows of chair. They see a table covered with mandarins, markers, blank world maps, and there's curiosity immediately, the soft electric hum of what's going to happen now. And that's what the Equality Archives comes in play. They can create art, they can use the photo voice, they can just talk about it, they can be a human library, and people can just listen, and they can project their emotions in the way. If you love, let's say, cooking, if you love baking, you can create those cookies with the toppings that you like while talking about what topping is going to represent what barriers you're facing in life. That's the creative pursuit of mapping the equality in our workshop.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's get into the heart of today's conversation, our workshop that you ran in April this year. This was our first real test, of this methodology and that we have been developing since, I think, last year. What was going through in your mind as we prepared? And so when participants arrived at the workshop, what was the atmosphere like? What happened there?
With the event of International Women's Day, where we conducted our first workshop, our workshop timing was at a time, fortunately and unfortunately, when all the panel discussions and trivia contest happened and everybody was so drained and they were so hungry, and it fell under the time where they're like, okay, what's next? But they're not actively participating in the sense. So they were interested about what the idea is about. And obviously our workshop was Peel the World, Reimagining Inequality, and they were interested to know about it. I had so many people coming in asking about it before the workshop even started. So there was a sense of excitement, giddiness. And when they came in, when they started doing those activities and they started talking about it, I saw a shift in their energies. You feel the room when people are excited to do something or they're not, and they're just doing it for the sake of doing. There was that shift. And that was the projection of the room. It changed entirely. It started with being a bit dull and drab to something they were so excited to do and talk about.
That shift is so important and so beautiful. So one thing we were very intentional about, right, that this comes from our ethical framework, and it's ensuring participants knew that sharing personal experiences was entirely voluntary. And people could maintain anonymity, could choose to observe rather than actively participate, and could withdraw contributions at any time. So they have the complete freedom and control over what they say and what they share and what they don't share, in a way. So this is a very trauma-informed approach, and which is very crucial when discussing something as potentially sensitive, as gender inequality. As you rightly pointed out, it's so personal, so emotional. It's like everyday experiences. And we weren't there to extract stories from people. Yeah. We were creating a safe space for those who wanted to explore and share. So can you please walk us through the activities of the workshop? What happened there?
So our workshop was Peel the World, Reimagining Inequality. And as you mentioned, it's really important to have a very safe space, which all the participants were told about. They can be anonymous if they want to share. If they don't want to share, it's totally up to them. It started with a mandarin, a simple fruit, but when you peel it, it becomes a metaphor of the world and the layers you carry, the things you protect, the things you hide. People slow down, they smell citrus, they touch the texture, and suddenly they are present in the moment. Then we move to the world map, not the world, their world. They draw the places that shaped them, people who influenced their beliefs, the movement that shifted their understanding of gender. No two maps are ever the same, as no two people are ever the same. One participant drew a tiny island in the corner of her map that said, "This is where I keep the things that I have never said out loud." And the room went quiet. Not uncomfortable, just deeply connected. People reached for memories, symbols, colors. One person drew a bridge between two continents to represent the tension between their cultural upbringing and their current values. And another drew a storm cloud over their childhood home. Speaks volumes. I don't know what they were thinking, but it just resonated. And someone else drew a garden and captioned it, "The place I'm still growing into."
Wow.
Isn't it beautiful?
I'm having goosebumps, honestly.
It was raw, beautiful, and completely unique to each person. And this is what we want at the end of the day. Just those happy faces telling us stories in the way they feel and they want to, and not being forced into telling it.
And then that shifts how people think, behave, and not only within themselves, but when you hear someone else's story, that shifts.
And the best thing is the feeling of validation, that you're not alone. You always have somebody there.
Yeah. True. That's such a powerful example of what we mean about creative outputs containing embedded insights. So when someone creates a visual map, like what you were just explaining that beautifully, or say writes a letter, to an imagined future, for instance, they're communicating through metaphor as you, and that becomes easier than speaking everything in words, a narrative. They create a narrative collectively. So these methods are particularly valuable when exploring complex social issues like inequality or power dynamics. But the creation is only one part of it, right? So what happened when we moved into more facilitated discussions, when they have created their world, and you move to asking questions or discussing what it means, why did you put this, why there is a cloud?
As I planned, it was completely different, to be honest. It ended at a very open-ended context of what one change you're going to make today, starting today. And it started with them identifying the barriers that they are facing to achieve their world of proper gender equality. And those barriers that they listed when everybody was talking about it, and people started identifying that obviously not all the barriers would be same, because they come from a different background, they come from different ideologies and individuality as well. But there were some barriers that were interconnected, interlinked, or even the same. And the conversation flowed naturally. They started discussing what was happening in previous parts of their lives, on what has changed now, or some things that are not changing and they really want to change. That was how the facilitation went. It was not me who was asking questions. It was them having the conversation deeply rooted into what they thought and what's actually happening. It was just people themselves creating that change, that impact among themselves.
Wow, that's so powerful, right? Because it felt so organic and so kind of natural, like nothing imposed. And this is where I think true participatory aspect becomes so much louder and clear, because that's how the participation should happen, right? It's not like you are imposing something on some people just to make them, force them in a way to participate, isn't it? So, and we saw that happening in real time. People weren't just expressing individual expressions or experiences. They were identifying patterns and finding connections, recognizing shared challenges that we often, in traditional research, we also try to find those patterns. But this is a completely different way of finding patterns, which I feel even more powerful, because people themselves are trying to find the patterns, not you as a kind of... So Do you remember what are some of these recurring themes that were coming, out of the workshop? What were they discussing about? Did you see connections between participants through the things that they were talking about in terms of themes?
With the themes, there was this one core thing that I really want to highlight is them having the upbringing in a very patriarchal society. Even though the world is changing at a very rapid pace, and we feel like women have their way now, they have all their rights, but it's not true. I feel like the barriers that they face started from their home. We can change the workplace, we can try and make rules in the government, but if it is not working for them at home, it's not working for anybody, because that's where you hinder your emotional and intellectual credibility to make a difference, right? So patriarchal society, having a very patriarchal head in the family, that was a very big barrier that everybody is still facing, and nobody really wants to talk about it because they feel like as the world is changing, everybody has a counter narrative of, but women have a platform now, they have a pavement to walk on. But what about the families? Right? And I think it's eating them from inside, and it's creating a shadow where you can't bloom into a very good flower if you're not given a proper nourishment. But if the nourishment is taken from a very core part, let's say from the head of the family itself, you feel so insecure. So that was the basic barrier that everybody faced.
So we will wrap up very soon. But before that, I wanted to ask another question. Having gone through this experience, what do you think participants took away from the workshop and from the discussions they were having?
I think the basic thing and the most amazing thing that they took away with themselves was their own identity. They were able to identify what they actually want to change and what's hindering them to make that change. And they were able to resonate with other people. And also in the crux of things that if I start making a difference now, I can see a better future. But if I stop myself, my daughters and the daughters of the next generation, they might not reap the fruits of the benefits that we can blow in. So the sense of identity, the owning of that identity is something that they took away. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, what would you say to someone who's listening to this podcast and probably thinking, I want to be part of this, or my community needs something like this? What would you say to them?
I would say we have talked about what's broken, what we are building, and why it works. But the real excitement is what comes next. Imagine a full cohort, 20 workshops, dozens of communities, hundreds of maps, thousands of stories. 6 months later, I'd hope participants carry a deeper self-awareness, sense of agency, vocabulary, visual, emotional, cultural, to talk about equalities in a way that feel authentic to them. And for organizations or communities or any groups listening, if something in this conversation is tugging at you, that's your invitation. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to be willing to explore, to peel your world, to let the creativity open the doors the conversation just alone can't. And if you're wondering what our map would look like, I think it would be a constellation. Not a single world, but many small light mentors, memories, mistakes, moments of courage, all connected by lines we are still drawing. Because equality isn't a destination, it's a map we are still making. And you can always connect with us. You can always connect with Go Equal. It just takes one click. You just have to think about it and execute it. And we are there to support you.
Thank you so much, Aman. Your creative vision and facilitation made this workshop and the whole methodology what it was, a genuine space for collective reflection and imagination. So for our listeners, I want to emphasize something Aman has touched on. This methodology recognizes that everyone has valuable insight to contribute. This methodology positions individuals and communities as co-creators of knowledge, whose lived experiences provide critical insight into the structures shaping their lives. You don't need to be an artist, as I'm quoting Aman. You just need to be willing to engage. We'll be continuing this work in Canberra and beyond, and you can learn more at our website, www.goequal.com.au, or through our socials. And we hope you will join us, whether as a participant, a partner organization, or simply as someone committed to reimagining what equality can look like. Thank you for listening to the Go Equal podcast. I am Dr. Joyce Das, and this has been a conversation about how creativity and participation can help us see gender inequality differently and imagine our way toward more equitable futures.
Thank you so much for having me here once again. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And again, I want to mention it has been possible because you were there. And I hope everybody finds somebody to look up to as much as I do.
The feeling is mutual, Aman. So thank you so much. So listeners, until next time, keep questioning, keep creating, and keep imagining. Thank you.